So I've been wanting to do a reading challenge for a while now where I read books from different countries. And I thought, what better country to start with than Palestine? Given all that's going on right now, I think it's really important to amplify Palestinian voices. Now, typically in future videos, I'll only be reading books that are published in that country. But obviously in Palestine, there's some extenuating circumstances that make that a bit difficult. So I'm just broadly going with Palestinian authors, even if these books may only be published in the United States. So I have 5 Palestinian books on my shelves, on my TBR, and in this video I'm going to be reading all of them. The first book that I'm starting with is Against the Loveless World by Susan Abelhawa. I don't know much about this book. Oh, I should hold it up on the other side. I don't know much about this book. I know that it takes place inside an Israeli confinement cell, and that's where our main character lives. I just started it, so I'm not far enough in to give you a synopsis yet, but I will check back in once I've read enough so that I can give you a little summary. I'm on page 160, which is nearly halfway, so I figured it's time for a little bit of a check-in. So essentially this book is, like I said, following a main character who is stuck in an Israeli confinement cell. But it's also split into 2 different timelines. So that's one timeline. That's the future timeline that we're hearing about. But it's also telling her life story before that happened, and I'm assuming leading up to that. It's her story of how she joined the resistance. And it talks about her growing up in Kuwait and about the subsequent invasions in the early 2000s. It's honestly just been interesting to hear about because I've never read a book set in Kuwait. I don't think I've ever read a book set in the Middle East now that I'm thinking about it. No, I have. But it's just not a setting I read about often, which honestly is an area of my reading that I need to remedy. I should definitely be reading more diversely and reading more diverse locations. I will say so far this book has just been very, very heavy. It talks about how she's essentially coerced into prostitution. There's scenes of rape in here over and over and over. This is not a light, fun read, which I should have known. Which I did know, because the main character is stuck in an Israeli confinement cell, so it's not going to be good for her. But it really is, I can just feel a weight on myself as I read, which I'm sure is going to be the case with all of these books, to be honest. I'm sure they're all going to be dark and depressing, which is usually my shit, but I just came off of reading the King of Scars duology, which is very lighthearted and fun, so this is a big change of pace for me right now. That said, I am enjoying it. I do think it's a very important book, and I'm sure I'll have a lot more to say once I've finished with it, which is going to be the next time I check in with you. I have finished Against the Loveless World, and I'm giving this book 4.5 stars, which is such a funny rating, because why can't I just commit to 4 or 5 stars? But for me it's truly in the middle, so I have to give it 4.5 stars. I think this is a very, very heavy story, but it's very important at the same time. And honestly, the story is just so harrowing that for the most part I felt like I was reading a memoir, except a really, really well written one, because I could not put this book down. In the acknowledgements, the author mentions how she interviewed people who lived in confinement for the story, and I think that research really shows throughout the book, because it just feels so real when you're reading the parts of the story where she's in the cube, which is what she calls her confinement cell. Obviously I'm never gonna know what it's like to be in solitary confinement, thank God, but this book I feel gave me some really real insight into that, and just made the setting feel so realistic. I also really appreciate that despite how heavy of a story this was, I mentioned this before, prostitution, rape, torture, every bad thing you can think of. It's the fucking occupation of Palestine. That alone is terrible. And the atrocities that the Israeli army commits are ridiculous and awful. So be prepared for that going into this book, because it's not sunshine and rainbows. But I do think at the same time that the author does a really good job of infusing hope throughout the book, that even while it's so heavy, you still want to read, and you do still have hope for the characters and for what they're doing, because their cause is so righteous. And in particular, I really liked the ending and the note that it left on. I think I'm just really glad to have read this, to be honest. Palestinian stories have always been important. They always will be important. But especially in the current moment that we're living in, it's so vital to pay attention to them and to amplify Palestinian voices. Something I really loved about this book is how it showed the beauty of Palestinian culture. There's one scene in particular where they're harvesting olives, and I think about it a lot because it's just such a beautiful community effort. And of course there's other instances of culture in here as well. I feel I learned a lot, to be honest, which is part of why it felt like a memoir. And the fact that she's balancing the horror of the occupation with this beauty of community and culture, I just think it's a really good balance. However, the only thing holding me back from giving this book 5 stars is that I just feel like the main character, I think you say her name Nar, but I could be wrong. I just feel like her character was a little off. Like, there were multiple times throughout the books where like she was engaging in some dialogue, and the way that she responded just felt so unnatural and stiff. She's also a very fierce character and very passionate, which I liked a lot about her. She's just so unapologetic for who she is, but at times it felt a little bit forced. But regardless, highly recommend this book. I think it's so important. I think it's so fucking good. I think everyone should read it. So now I have to move on to another book, and I'm kind of torn between, first of all, Minor Detail. This book I think is gonna be my favorite out of this video. I just have a feeling that I'm gonna absolutely adore this, so that makes me kind of want to put it off and maybe read it last. And also, Against the Love of This World was so heavy. So actually, I'm talking myself into this as I speak. I'm going to pick up Evil Eye by Taf Rum instead. I don't know much about this. I know that it follows like a Palestinian living in America, I'm pretty sure, and her family has some curse or something. And then as I read this, I'm also going to continue to read Shell Shocked, On the Ground Under Israel's Gaza Assault by Mohammed Omer. This is a book that I've already started and I'm already most of the way through, and it's part of why I wanted to make this video now so that I could finish this book as part of this video. This is the only non-fiction book I have in my little stack of Palestinian books right now, and this book is basically documenting the 2014 assault against Gaza. It's from a journalist's perspective, and each chapter is just giving you like a new tidbit of what the life is like under that attack. So I like to read nonfiction and fiction at the same time, so I think I'm gonna read both of these and then I'll give you a bit of an update once I've finished one. I have finished Evil Eye, and honestly only in a couple handful of hours, so that's very impressive to me. I did, however, take the entire day off from studying, so maybe not the best decision, but I'm gonna stick with it. I needed a day off. So I'm giving this book 4 stars. So essentially you're following our main character Yara. She's the daughter of Palestinian immigrants. She had a very insanely rough and traumatizing childhood. Her family also has generational trauma from the Nakba, obviously, and you're following her as she's a grown woman. She's now married, has 2 children, and she's really struggling with her life. She's struggling with who she wants to be. She's struggling with the trauma of her past, and she's also struggling up against like modern day racism and sexism. So similar to Against the Love of This World, this book was often very heavy, but it balanced it out towards the end with like a lot of hope, which I thought was beautiful. I think Rum did a really good job at portraying like intergenerational trauma, because that was definitely the main focus of this book, and she was so gifted in the way that she like fleshed out the relationships between the characters. Like, they felt so complex and so raw and real. And this book even made me cry, which is crazy because I can't remember the last time I cried at a book. Like, they usually don't affect me that much, even though I only read dark and depressing books. So that's really saying something. At the same time, though, it wasn't perfect, hence why I'm not giving it 5 stars. Even though I do feel like I've gotten very insanely picky with my 5-star ratings this year. I don't know what that's about, but this is only 4, and I have reasons for that. So I'm not going to spoil anything, but it bugs me how easy things came to Yara at the end. Like, obviously for the bulk of the book, everything's just absolutely horrible for her, so it's good that like good things start to happen, but it just felt like a lot of harsh realities were kind of glazed over and made not an issue when in real life they very much would have been. It's kind of like as soon as she changed her attitude, the whole world just magically got better, which isn't very realistic, though I do wish things were that easy. But at the same time, I did really enjoy this. I would highly recommend it. So, I did not get very far in Shell Shocked. I think I read a total of like 10 pages, but I'm currently on page 207, so I'm going to continue working on this. This might be like my main focus, but I'm also going to pick up Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear by Masab Abu Taha. This is a collection of poetry written by a Palestinian poet. I'm nervous about this one because I'm not really a poetry person, which I've said many times here. I'm hoping this one will be different because I'm hoping the poetry is going to be kind of political. I'm assuming it's going to be because I know there's a lot about like Palestine in here, and I'm hoping that's going to bridge the gap and make me like poetry more than I usually do. So let's pray for that. And yeah, that's all for now. I'll check in with you once I've read one of these. Goodbye. I just finished 2 more books, bringing me to a grand total of 4 books finished today, which I think is like the most books I've ever read in one day, which is just insane. But let's talk about the books. I was reading these 2 books at the same time, so that's why I'm just talking about them at the same time. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is Shell Shocked, On the Ground Under Israel's Gaza Assault. This book is a first-hand account of Israel's attack on Gaza in 2014, told by a local journalist. It's not really written like a narrative style, it's just made up of very, very short, like article-like chapters, each talking about like a different situation in Palestine, in Gaza during the time. This book was very harrowing, but I think it's very necessary. I just think it's really important for the way that it humanizes Gaza's population. Like, I think it's really easy to hear about the atrocities being committed in Palestine and kind of process it in a very distant intellectual way where it doesn't like personally hit you just because you're just hearing numbers. But this book really makes it personal. The author is constantly giving you the full name of everyone he's talking about, so everyone he interviews, as well as like the dead that he's talking about, he gives their full name, and it just felt really important to like sit with those names. And he like gives stories from their family to really humanize these people. Like, one in particular that I remember is he was talking about an 8-year-old boy who had just been murdered by Israeli snipers along with most of his family, and one of his family members shared that he had been so excited to start going to school that he had already started packing his backpack. And it's just small instances of heartbreak and big instances of heartbreak constantly throughout this book. I just think this book really brings you to the reality of what's happening on the ground in Palestine. And the worst part about this book is that things have gotten so much worse. I mean, this was a decade ago now, and they're referring to places that were once safe for people in Gaza that no longer exist. Like, they're talking about a lot of like the UN schools that people went to as like a safe place, and I've known for a fact that Israel has been bombing those schools. They talk about Al-Shifa Hospital. We all know what happened there. Like, it's just awful to think about, and it's just such a heavy subject matter, but I really think it's important to read, and I really think it's important to humanize these people and hear their stories. It just really brings you to the fact that these are people, like, they're complex, they have personalities, they have people who love them, and it was a lot, but I'm glad that I read it. And then this one I have less to talk about. This is Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear by Musab Abu Taha. This is a poetry collection. I gave Shell Shocked 4 stars, and I also gave this collection 4 stars. So like I said before, I'm not a poetry person. I usually don't like reading it, but this collection did it for me, to be honest. I think I just need like very overtly political poetry, and then I can be into it, because really this one hurt. This hurt to read. Like, not all the poems affected me, but the ones that did really did. And that's all I can really say about it, because I don't know how to review poetry because I don't read it. So there we go for that one. This means I have one book left to read, and that is Minor Detail by I'm covering her name with my hand, but Adania Shibli. This is the book that I've been most excited about. I mean, excited is a funny word to use here because I know this book is going to be like emotionally destructive, and I know it's, again, going to be a very harrowing read. So what I know about this book is that it takes place during 2 different timelines. One is in the past, I think it's during the Nakba or maybe shortly after, and it follows a Palestinian woman who is attacked, raped, and killed by the IDF. And then another timeline takes place in the current day where you're following a woman who has heard about this woman's story and it deeply affects her. So this is going to be a rough read. I just know it already, but it made a lot of like favorite lists last year, so I'm kind of convinced that this is going to be a new favorite. So let's hope. And I will see you when I'm done reading it. I have finished Minor Detail, and I'm very sad to report that this isn't a 5-star read, which really sucks because I really thought I was going to absolutely go crazy over this. I am giving it 4 stars, so it's not a bad read by any means imaginable. This book is very short. I'm talking 105 pages, could easily be read in one sitting. I read it in 2, and that's only because I had to study today. So I had to stop in the middle of it for a bit. But even though it's short, it's just so fucking devastating to read. The first half of the book especially really hit me hard. The only reason I'm not giving this 5 stars is because the second half didn't like hit me as much emotionally, which is through no fault of the author at all. Like, that's just a personal thing. I think it's the same reason I have trouble with like short stories. I also tend to have trouble like emotionally connecting to novellas. So it's definitely just a me thing. But regardless, I really think this is worth a read. Again, like all these books I've been talking about, I think it's a really important story and one that needs to be heard. And I also think this is like a beautifully written book. But sadly, I just don't have much else to say because it's so short. And the shorter something is, the less I know what to talk about. So there you go. That was me reading all of the Palestinian books on my TBR. Clearly, I need to buy more Palestinian books like ASAP because all of these were a hit. It's been such a long time. I feel like every book that I write recently is only like 3 stars at best. So the fact that everything in this video was at least 4 stars is wild. I've been very picky with my 4 and 5 star ratings. And honestly, perhaps some of these books did deserve to be 5 stars. But for me, 5 star is like a feeling. Which is so arbitrary, but that's just how it works for me. If you have any other Palestinian book recommendations, please leave them down below because I would love to check them out, and I highly recommend that you check these books out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon in another video. Goodbye.